Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Jeff Abercrombie across the other way with me. Jeff, college football, the real opening week is literally concluding as we are recording this podcast. Clemson, Georgia Tech. It has been a whirlwind couple of days for college football, for prospect talk. How are you doing this evening, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Monday's holiday Monday, and so I actually got some chance to get into the film when I wasn't chasing Neely around the the living room. So that was kind of great too. And yeah, we've already got storylines developing. So there's a lot to get into. And just as a teaser to make for a great college football season, it sounds like.
Yeah, and normally during the season shows, we will have it structured as talking about draft eligible prospects, then we'll quick hit on Devy Slant, talking about some underclassmen prospects, and then we close out with the NFL rookie report, talking about, rookies that really, things that stood out, and then, like the dynasty report also, where anybody in the NFL, right? That's kind of our season thing where we can talk about anybody in the dynasty report, NFL rookie report. But tonight it's just the college guys. So we're gonna rapid fire hitting on a lot of guys tonight. And I think we got to start the quarterback position with a guy who I was very high on, and I didn't know how he was going to look first game against Utah, Florida versus number 7 Utah, and Anthony Richardson passed with flying colors. Yes, he was efficient, I think is the best way to put it in terms of his passing. 17 of 24, 168 yards, nothing gaudy, but he showed some touch throws. He showed some anticipatory throws. He showed some ability to go through progressions, things that we want to see develop and grow this year. And then the special wild card, 106 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, that playmaker ability. I think right now, I know it might be hyperbole, but I was already high on him. If you're running in the Devy circles, I'm not sure. I would go get him right now, because I think right now, I think his stock is only going to continue to soar. And I think you should make the case that he could already be QB1 in Devy circles, because he might not be a better quarterback than CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, and maybe the NFL doesn't think so next April. But I think he's on the trajectory of being round 1. I think he could push those guys to be the first quarterback taken. But that X factor of the running ability, to me, I would have him. I moved him up today. The rankings notebook, it's live breathing document. I moved him up to number 1 in my Devy rankings at the quarterback position, because I want in on him now. I saw a lot that I really liked from Richardson in this game versus Utah, and the ceiling is so much higher. There's so much he's still got to work on. Jeff, any quick thoughts, because the quarterback show you weren't able to join me with, about Richardson and what you saw either from him this week or just the skill set that makes him such an intriguing prospect?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about traits, I think everything's there, and there's a lot of reason to get excited about traits. And I think my one caution, and this isn't a knock or to say that Richardson doesn't have it, but I think traits are not even half the equation, right? And I think there's a long way to go for Richardson to actually put himself into a conversation, in my eyes, with Stroud and Young. And that's not to say, like, I don't think his trajectory is going to get there, because I think you're right. If you like getting him on your Devy squad, making a move to buy in on Richardson now, if you can, is the right move to make for your Devy squads for fantasy, because you're looking for upside. You're looking for a guy who can be the top quarterback taken, and you're not going to have to pay that price. And yeah, it's a gamble, but you want the upside. So this has nothing to do with like an argument against the excitement, the buildup of Richardson and his run to this 2023 NFL draft. I just think there's going to be a lot of way to go. Like I saw the plays, right? You see the pump fake, the ball fake, and just the ability to evade pressure and then hit a corner of the end zone shot. Like, that's amazing. That's also not what 99% of quarterbacking is. And so the other 99% has to be there. But when you talk about who has to be able to play as an NFL player, you're talking about the 99.9%, the elite of the elite are the ones that succeed at the NFL level. And you need to be able to make the type of plays that you saw on film right there on that highlight film. So that's what I think is getting people excited, and buying in and saying, hey, you've got to pay attention. I don't know if I would say this guy's the real deal. I'd say you've got to pay attention now, because if a lot of those other pieces start being put together, not everybody can do that. But if they are, his ceiling is monumental.
Yeah, and the thing is, unlike a guy like Malik Willis, where we didn't get really a chance to see too much against better level competition, we're going to get a chance, right? It started with Utah, a very good team. He's going to have to run through the SEC gauntlet. Next week, it's Kentucky, I believe. And him versus Will Levis is going to draw a lot of, attention, because they're two of the guys who are being talked about as two of the top quarterbacks in that 2023 class after CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. So it's going to be fun to watch it. And it's really, we already know the things that he can do that are special, the athleticism, the playmaking ability, but it's going to be week to week checking in on the maturity and development of the quarterbacking, what you were just talking about, going through progressions, reading coverages, throwing with touch and anticipation. I mean, because if he starts to put that on top of the athleticism, I mean, then we're talking about a really, really, extreme, like, rare outlier in terms of a guy who put that all together. Usually we have one extreme or the other, really good athleticism and stuff, like all the things that we liked about Malik Willis, but there was so much uncertainty, and even Lamar Jackson way back when, right? Like there was lots to his game, but I think Richardson, I kind of said he's part Cam Newton, part Dante Culpepper, part Josh Allen, Wyoming. Like there's a lot, all those guys that I just mentioned too. There were lots of question marks about them translating to the NFL game. So it's going to be interesting to follow that. We kind of mentioned there CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. Bryce Young kind of got Alabama going. Not a big surprise. I don't think anything really stood out from Bryce Young this week. We knew Alabama was going to roll, but the CJ Stroud in that Notre Dame Ohio State game, I really found interesting, because Ohio State didn't look that comfortable, especially with Jaxon, Smith-Njigba missing the good majority of that game with an injury. But the one thing that I questioned about CJ Stroud when I during my film evaluation over the summer was you didn't see a lot of times where he made plays on the move. I thought he showed a real comfort level the other night, making plays when he was forced to move the launch point. He wasn't able to stay in the pocket. Notre Dame was getting a lot of good pressure. So while the stats weren't super gaudy and Ohio State came away with the win, I came away impressed with CJ Stroud showing more, a little bit more than I had seen last year, just because he wasn't asked to do it and they didn't really see a lot of pressure. I thought he was much more comfortable throwing on the move than maybe I gave him credit for. He's never going to be a guy that does a lot with his legs, but I thought that stood out. Jeff, any thoughts on Stroud, or maybe take this to another quarterback that you thought, an intriguing week one for them?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that we will watch with Stroud, and we know that he's going to be sought highly within NFL circles. Same thing with Bryce Young. Bryce Young had a 6 touchdown game, and 100 yards rushing. So, that's interesting, right? What is that going to look like? Is that going to translate on an NFL level or not? If we're going to talk about the rushing side of things, we could talk about Jayden Daniels, who you had highlighted up here, who had, 209 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 114 yards rushing. And I want to, and then I guess we'll just mention Will Levis too, because you mentioned the upcoming game with him and Richardson, but 21 of 32, 303, 3-1. But let me just kind of like circle back, hone in a little bit on Jayden Daniels, because as we'll get into, some of the we'll get into Boutee, on the wide receiver show, but one of my notes there is that he had a Jayden Daniels issue. And I think the thing that I saw with Jayden Daniels is, again, that athleticism is there, and I'm going to highlight this again, not as a mark against Richardson yet, because this isn't, a film scouting of Richardson, but when I did go back and I watched that LSU game, Jayden Daniels is not playing the quarterback position the same way that an NFL team is going to want him to play it. He is 3 steps and then go. And when I say go, I mean he's running. He's not even giving Boutee a chance to uncover. Boutee's in favorable, it's like a favorable coverage to the right side of the field. He's got, 2 wide receivers, 1 man in coverage, and a zone defender underneath. And Boutee's streaking down the sidelines. Like, that'd be a touchdown. And then it looks like a great play because, Daniels, there's the contain got broken on the rush. He gets around the outside. He hits the corner. He gets 25 yards running. Like, I mean, that's impressive. And hey, that's great for your fantasy team too. But, those are the little pieces that when we come into February, March, and we start dissecting these guys and we say, who's going to make it? Who's going to make that step and that transition? Those are the types of plays where you're going to need to see them, make the NFL play, not the college play. And so, as far as, again, I can't speak to Richardson here, but as far as Daniels goes, and so again, those tools and the excitement, I think there's a lot of growth to go in order to be, in a conversation as a, in my mind, quarterback prospect that teams are going to really want to invest in.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that entire game, and I thought he was going to get benched, to be honest with you, because like they looked like they were, not until they were forced to late in the game, but they just did not really want to even let him do anything until he had to. And then when they actually let him do some quarterbacking things and make some throws and some reads late in the game, he was pretty decent at it. But
yeah,
early on, they just they wanted him, like you said, 3 steps, throw like a quick dump off, short pass, towards the sidelines, very safe, if not just run. And that was basically their game plan for the first 3+ quarters. It was very strange. And then finally, when they kind of had to do it, he made some really good throws. And I'm not saying he's not that consistent, but it was weird play calling. They were trying to almost hide him until they had to kind of, and then he did play pretty good there. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see his maturity and his growth a little bit this year. And if he can get a little bit better in terms of those quarterbacking skills. To me, he's a little bit more athlete than quarterback. And the same thing can be said about Anthony Richardson right now. I'm just not sure Jayden Daniels has the physical traits that makes Richardson a little bit more intriguing.
Right. And, you say play calling, I saw a bunch of 5-yard button hooks. We're talking Jason Garrett level play calling here. I also said with Boutee, he's got a Brian Kelly problem too. So we'll get to him. But, I think some of it is a play calling. Some of it, like the play that I mentioned, that was all Daniels. He had a pocket, even though I said the edge broke contain, he had a pocket to step up and hit the go on Boutee. So I think there's a lot of things going on in LSU, and they lost that game. One of the things that I think you could be looking at a Clemson situation where things just aren't working there. And that's one of the storylines for the college football season that I'm going to want to pay attention to.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, as someone who follows Notre Dame pretty closely, I know the record was always gaudy, but Brian Kelly was just not a guy that, I don't know. There was something about Brian Kelly that I never thought he was a big time coach. I didn't really think he had a big time schematic fit or advantage or edge in that regard, like other coaches do. So I don't know. I don't know if that pairing. I mean, they obviously
it's kind of questionable from day one in my mind, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's the storyline, right? We got to follow it. We can't make judgments now, but
for sure. A couple other draft eligible quarterbacks. I'll kind of rattle them off rapid fire, and then maybe you pick one or two you want to mention something on, Jeff. Jaron Hall out of BYU is a guy I'm going to be following closely. He's got a really intriguing skill set. 25 of 32, 261 yards, 2 touchdowns. BYU just rolled this weekend in a game that some people thought was going to be way more competitive than it was. I like Hall a lot. I'm kind of interested to see his rise this year. Tyler Van Dyke out of Miami, who is already got some round one buzz, and a guy people think he can get up there. Very efficient, 13 of 16 for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not much to base it off of for Miami's opponent this week, but just a nice start to Van Dyke's season because, he's one of those top guys. Phil Jurkovec out of BC. I watched that whole game start to finish. I just don't see with Jurkovec. Like I'm not. I know there are people that really like him. I think back to like a couple years ago, like I didn't really love Kyle Trask. I don't like for what I've seen of Jurkovec so far. Like to me, like at best he's Kyle Trask or like below. Like I think if he's a round 4 guy, maybe I don't see a skill set. Like he had a couple of terrible interceptions that were just like mind boggling. BC, blew that game away at the end and kind of choked it away. And then Dylan Gabriel, formerly of UCF and now Oklahoma, 233 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jeff, any thoughts on either Hall or Van Dyke or Jurkovec or Gabriel here to kind of round out the draft eligible quarterbacks we want to hit on tonight?
I'm with you on Jurkovec. Even, when we looked through his film last year, that was again part of it is I just, even in last year's quarterbacks class, he kind of was not standing out. And you saw where all of last year's quarterbacks went, right? I am really following Van Dyke pretty closely here. I mean, the 13 of 16, it's just, we'll see when Miami actually goes through not the week 1 competition, right? And goes down the stretch and see what he does. But I think, that program has the ability to, make a little bit more noise. And especially with him behind center. And then Dylan Gabriel, just, I think he was on my radar when he was at UCF. I think he made great plays there. He's had some rough injury luck. And he's been sitting for some injuries. The transfer, the Oklahoma program, he had an efficient day. They didn't need to, win a barn burner or anything. That's just another name that I'm going to follow through this year and see what happens there, right? What happens there?
Yeah, for sure. So, a lot of guys will be following. It's going to be fun. This quarterback class, we're going to have a lot to talk about almost every single week. Let's transition this over to the draft eligible running backs, some storylines that we want to hit upon. I think the first one is Kenny McIntosh out of Georgia. He was a guy Dane Brugler was talking up last week on the show. Earlier in the summer during the running back show, I said I was intrigued by his skill set. And I think we saw right off the bat that they have a plan in place for him. And it is going to be very much the James Cook role. He only had 5 carries for 18 yards. One of them was a touchdown. But I don't think they're going to use him a ton in that regard. They're going to kind of split that workload. It'll be interesting when they're being challenged in a little bit more of a closer game, if those actually happen at times, besides when they play Alabama. But they really like his receiving capabilities. 9 catches, 117 yards. Like you don't see numbers like that too often from college running backs. Especially, going up against Oregon. Like, this wasn't like going up against, some 1AA team or something like that. So really impressive start. I think they have a plan in place for him. Dane was talking him up even more than I liked his game last week, that he said in NFL circles, there's a lot of intrigue with McIntosh's game. So that stood out. And then one more, and then I'll let you chime in on these and then bring up some other names that you want to talk about. Eric Gray, we talked a lot about him on the running back show. He was supposed to go to Oklahoma last year and kind of seize that opportunity and be a big weapon there. And then he just kind of didn't do much, right? Kennedy Brooks kind of held him off. But this year, week 1 starts, 16 carries, 102 yards rushing, another 33 in the pass game as well. Clear RB1 duty. So I think that's something that stood out this week after he never was able to really do that last year. So Jeff, any thoughts on McIntosh or Gray before maybe you transition this over to a couple other running backs?
No, I mean, I think when we talked about the Georgia backfield, it's always nice to have an idea for a replacement to the guy, second round NFL player, drafted NFL player you lost. And, the hard thing about replacing them is, you've got to be able to actually have someone who can step up in those shoes. And so, yes, call this I know some people were already on Kenny McIntosh, but, this is his coming out party, right? Same thing, Arik Gray, right? Like, hey, the sledding will get tougher. And, my film break on him on the preview was that, hey, he's going to need to, learn how to run, when the running's not so easy. So hey, this is being the clear one, having, 50% of all the running back touches in a blowout, right? Is something that I think is a great sign moving forward for Gray and his draft stock. But again, we're going to have, I didn't watch his tape. I didn't watch the game. But that's what we're going to have to see, week to week as it grows, right? One, that he holds that role. Two, that as he holds that role, as he gets those reps, he starts refining and developing his game, so that he can take it, from a space game to, up when the field condenses at the NFL level, he'll still be effective. So moving on, add in a couple names, we talked about him. I sent a clip out, he had some buzz, but Mo Ibrahim comes in, returns from injury, has 132 yards, 2 touchdowns. And Paul, he looked like the same back he did when he was a year ago playing Ohio State. I mean, I thought he had, he showed the burst, he showed the contact balance, he translated that to power. I told you, like, I need to see it a little bit, and he's going to be a flag plant player, and I'm going to be all in. And it's one of those things where, I'm getting sucked in. So again, you had some questions about his athleticism. I don't know if you saw this game, but if you did, I'm going to be extremely curious to, what you think about Ibrahim.
Yeah, I mean, I got a chance to watch a little bit of it, and it was impressive, especially his first game back. Like,
Off an
like
Achilles, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's remarkable, right? Like, just even Cam Akers making it back to the Super Bowl last year. These guys like are coming back from Achilles injuries, and he looked really good. Like he looked like you said, almost like similarly to the player that we saw in that Ohio State game. So he's gonna be interesting because he's a guy like when I watched him last summer, I came away a solid prospect, like a solid guy, like, a guy who I thought could be like, around 4, around 5 guy, and then looked really good in that Ohio State game, but then got injured. So like it was hard to really adjust my thoughts at all. But he's a guy who I don't think he creates a lot, but I think he's a very like, and part of it is like, James Robinson came out of nowhere to have a really good year. Like there's guys who can do that. Ibrahim is a guy who I think could, if he was given an opportunity, could be a guy that really produces. It's just, I'm still looking to find some traits that I think will make him stand out to get pushed up that board a little bit, to be a guy that goes in the first 100 picks and not kind of mixed in with that, that wide range of day 3 guys, where then it really seems to always fall upon, does the opportunity break their way to really be more than a complementary or depth piece? And
I love how you say James Robinson too, because that's who, I mean, it's not my comp for him because I haven't dug far enough, but that is exactly who comes to mind when I watch him play. And, as far as his standout trait, like, okay, he's not a home run hitter. Okay, he's not like Derrick Henry out there. How about just, his overall innate with the instincts for the position, right? Like, that's usually learned skill, but his instincts for the position are, in my mind, what makes him stand out, in this class.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think it's going to be fun to kind of watch him, and we'll see, some interesting games there in the Big Ten and stuff. So why don't you take this over? I know another guy that, kind of an under the radar guy that you really wanted to bring up.
Yeah. And, just we'll hit some big names before we get here. Jahmyr Gibbs, 993 and a touchdown. Zach Evans debut, 130 yards, 22 more, 2 catches. Zach Charbonnet, another 100 on the ground, touchdown, had 5 catches. Achane had more of a quiet game, but he had 18 touches there, 42 yards, a touchdown. I want to bring a name because we didn't have him on our preview list. But he's a name that I've seen in, the deeper Devy circles, in the deeper draft circles. Lou Nichols had, 26 carries, 72 yards, 2 touchdowns, 6 receptions, another 26 yards. It doesn't look like a great yards per carry. That's not going to be a problem for this guy. One, because I watched all of those snaps, all the game, each one of those reps, and and a lot of those carries were in short yardage situations, 3rd and 1, 4th down conversion, goal line situations, right? So yards per carry, forget about that. Lou Nichols, so Central Michigan, 5'11", 222. Last year, he led FCS in rushing, 1,850 yards. He also had 40 receptions for 340 yards through the air, 18 total touchdowns. Massive production at Central Michigan. But as a player, he's a power runner. He's able to shed first and second level tacklers. A lot of the plays design, he's following the play. He got plays, but there are times where he eschews the play design, takes it on himself, and he kind of wins. He makes, when he makes those decisions, he's making the most of it and getting more than he otherwise would have gotten. I think he's got pretty good vision. The other reason I think he's got pretty good vision is he's usually able to have a plan and evade backfield pressure and be able to still be on track to his play and his assignment. He's got a good size, good frame, and with that size and frame, he can start and stop and redirect his momentum pretty well. He's not, he's not Deuce Vaughn out there, right? With just one sharp cuts. It's a couple chop steps, but enough to trip up defenders, make them take poor angles, be somewhat evasive, for a 220-pound guy, and decent as a receiver, right? He's there in the screen game, the outlet game, some yard after catch ability. I'm bringing him up because I don't think we're talking about some guy who's coming out of nowhere into a top 100 pick, but I think he's a player that you have to keep your eye on. You have to see how he produces. You have to see how he plays, and you're gonna probably hear his name out, in the run up to the NFL draft circles as some guy, as somebody that teams are starting to key in on, and teams are going to start liking. So I bring him up here because we'll probably talk about him from time to time. I'm keeping my eye on him. You guys should too.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I didn't get a chance to watch, so he's a guy that I'm going to want to just do some film work on before I get a real feel for him. But he's like the prototypical guy. Like, fast forward this to next April, he's the type of guy that Waldman comes on and just speaks poetically about, and then he goes in round 6 or 7, or is a priority free agent, and then all of a sudden you start hearing all these glowing reports. I just kind of feel that's the trajectory of a guy like this. That
I think he could be. I think he could be a pick in the 120s, round 4 kind of guy. He's going to be one where he will be taken over some of these other big names that we've talked about. If he went above Zach Charbonnet, I would not be shocked at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and listen, I think that's the names that have been out there in the Devy circles for years. I feel like people always kind of hold on to them, and the NFL might think of things very differently. And Charbonnet is a guy here I was going to kind of mention in a couple, quick hitters. He does what he did. Charbonnet's going to have a great year. He's going to have a great statistical year. 101 yards rushing, a touchdown, 5 catches, 36 yards. I just struggled to see, when you take him out of that Chip Kelly scheme and you take him out of that offense, I'm just not sure his game is going to translate to be anything more than a complimentary or depth piece at the next level. Jahmyr Gibbs, you mentioned before, he had his Alabama debut, very rock solid, not 93 yards and a touchdown. Zach Evans transferred from TCU to Ole Miss. What I like about the Zach Evans, just even the production was really good, but the touches and the workload, 22 total touches, 20 rushes, 2 receptions. That was the thing. Dane Brugler last week said, Lane Kiffin feeds his best players. Any questions about Zach Evans, past years, not seeing a heavy volume, that's going to go out the window. We're going to see Zach Evans get fed 20, 22, 24, 25 touches a game. It started this weekend, and he's going to see, live up to the hype that, of how talented he is. Devin Achane, obviously a guy that, I'm a big fan of. Dane was on last week talking about him too. Very ho-hum statistical game, only had 42 yards rushing and a touchdown. But I do think the thing that stood out about Achane was 18 rushes. The size frame is always going to be a concern with him, but I think this year he's going to get a real opportunity to maybe at least show that he can handle a heavier workload. So that's kind of like Tyler Beatty did last year for Missouri. Prior to that year, people had questions about whether he can handle a heavy workload. He answered that. Sean Tucker out of Syracuse, another big name, 100 yards rushing and a touchdown, 84 yards receiving and a touchdown. I've already said, to me, he's Maurice Jones-Drew 2.0. I love watching Tucker play. So those are a couple of big guys that kind of kicked off their seasons. I don't think anything stood out too much one way or the other. Nice to see Evans and Achane handle a heavy workload. And then Travis Dye, one of my guys who I really was high on. It's clear there's no pecking order right now in USC. And in that backfield, very minimal touches. That could hurt a guy like Travis Dye who needs to see 8 to 10 carries a game, 3 to 5 receptions a game, I think really to kind of hit his stride. Jeff, any thoughts on any of those bigger names I said? And also maybe I definitely want to hear your take and bring up the Michigan backfield, because I think that was something that definitely stood out this weekend as well.
Yeah, I mean, Gibbs is good. Evans is good. Tucker is good. Go back to our running back preview pod. That's what we're seeing. And, they're just building upon their draft stock. So, putting more tape out there, showing more NFL problem solving. They had some great highlights. Go watch them. Get excited about them. The Michigan backfield I thought was interesting because both Corum and Edwards played pretty well, right? And so that was my thing with Corum was how much are they going to split? How much are they going to work? Who's going to have what roles? Who's going to take over a pass catching role? Both only had one reception this last game. So we're not seeing something along the lines of a Kenny McIntosh sort of passing level back. But 13 for 76 and a touchdown for Corum, 12 for 61 and a touchdown for Donovan Edwards. Right now, we've got an even split, an even roll. They're complementing each other. That's not a death knell for either of their draft stocks, but you might not see one guy run away with the job because both are very capable backs. And so, we're going to have to evaluate them more on their skills than we will on, say, metrics or production or anything like that. So it's something to keep an eye on. Again, I just want to see how that unfolds. There's a lot of other, we'll see that on the receiver side, with different, receiving duos too, who's standing out. Two quick hits or one last final quick hit. And then if you want to comment, on the Michigan guys or, Raheem Sanders, who hit 20 for 117. Again, we're talking about, athleticism here and upside. I didn't think he had a great refined game, but you've got to keep an eye on these guys. Like you mentioned with Richardson, if they, really start to take over in the college season, both from a production and a skills building standpoint, they're a name that you need to follow closely. So any other comments there before you take us to the wide receivers?
Yeah, just, you mentioned that Michigan backfield, and I think what it comes down to is, listen, we've seen the Georgia backfield be split for years, and like guys both go to the NFL, right? We saw Michael Carter and Javonte Williams come out of the same backfield, and the truth be told is Blake Corum probably is best in more of that dual backfield, right? No NFL team's going to draft Blake Corum next year and think he's the guy who's going to come in, just like Buffalo didn't draft James Cook and think that James in the second round to think that he's going to come in and handle a 20, touch workload probably. So my guess is Blake Corum is probably going to have that kind of view in terms of the NFL eyes. So they might get a chance right now to kind of see him be not a complementary piece. He has a pivotal role, but not going to be a clear one and then a backup. It's going to be more, especially Michigan. They're going to run a lot. They still want to be a team that relies on their run game a lot as well. So I think that kind of suits Corum probably pretty well based on, what he brings to the table. So it'd be interesting to kind of see. And I also think it's going to behoove Texas A&M to maybe not run Achane as much as I like the player, not to run him 20 times in between the tackles either. When games start getting a little bit more competitive against better teams, they're going to have to find somebody to take on part of that Isaiah Spiller role from last year as well, especially as they start getting into the meat of their schedule down the line. So let's transition this over to the wide receivers. And you mentioned them before. So let's just start with Kayshon Boutee. 2 catches, 20 yards, but disinterested, annoyed, like the memes and the comments and the GIFs that were flying out there on Twitter immediately. You mentioned before, maybe it's a Jayden Daniels issue, maybe it's a Brian Kelly issue, but like you watched the first half of that game, and all anybody was saying is, why didn't he just go transfer to Alabama, right? Like, why didn't he go do the Jermaine Burton thing? Like, because they're not gonna maximize his skill set. They're not going to give him a chance to catch 12 balls for 200 yards. That's not how Jayden Daniels is going to play quarterback. That's not how Brian Kelly is going to call it. And then once you already get a loss, once the season is kind of like, okay, what is LSU playing for? Are we going to even see? Like, to me, like, how many games are we even going to see Boutee play this year? I think is already a legitimate question, because he knows he probably doesn't have to do another thing, and he'd already be in the mix to be a top 15 or top 20 wide receiver if he just kind of shut it down and then ramped it up for the pre-draft process. So that was the big thing, that stood out. And then I mentioned it before, Jaxon Smith-Njigba leaving the game early. We saw Ohio State really, scatter a little bit, when he left the game. We didn't get a real feel if we were going to see Smith-Njigba play more outside in the limited amount of snaps that he had. I think we still saw him line up in the slot a lot, and I didn't chart it, but a full game, I think it would have been more obvious to see if he had one of his 10 catch games. Well, were they all coming from the slot? Like, I think that would have been interesting. So still, that is to be determined. So those two big guys right at the top. Jermaine Burton got his start this week, 2 touchdowns. I think we're going to see a lot of touchdowns from him. Quentin Johnson, quiet week there. Those are pretty much considered 4 of the top wide receivers, if not D4 in the country. So Jeff, any more thoughts elaborating on the Boutee situation and anything else with either Smith-Njigba, Burton, or Quentin Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to talk about Boutee a little bit more, right? I mean, you're not going to get, anywhere. You're hiding under a rock if you don't hear any conversations about him. So why don't we just join the chorus, right? So, I mentioned a little bit earlier, I said, does he have a Jayden Daniels problem? Does he have a Brian Kelly problem? And, I think that factors in a lot, but he's also got a Kayshon Boutee problem, right? Like, it's not Jayden Daniels' fault when you're just dropping obvious passes right at your hands. Yeah, I mean, that happens to receivers from time to time, right? Like, we're not saying that all of a sudden he can't play football, but like, there's a Kayshon Boutee problem right there, right? And so Brian Kelly is not scheming up Kayshon Boutee the way that Kayshon Boutee wants to see that, right? Like, Neighbors seems to be getting a lot of those schemed looks, right? Like, dragged around, like, drags around the shallow cross to get some yards after the catch, get those first downs. Like, those aren't going to Boutee the same way that they used to. I mentioned Jayden Daniels as far as, like you said, he was going to get benched, right? Yeah, there were some plays. It wasn't just the play calling too, or that they didn't trust him. Like, I mean, he was bailing on the passing plays to use his legs, and effectively, for a lot of the times. A lot of times he got sacked too, but but it's pretty hard when you're Kayshon Boutee. You've got a great look. You've got the matchup that you want on the outside. No safety help over the top. Two wide receivers stressing one cornerback, and you don't get the ball on that side of the field. And you look across the field, and Jayden Daniels is like 50 yards away from you running down the field. Like, they're not on the same page. They're not on the same page. And then again, there were problems with Kayshon Boutee's game. Like, this was not a good game for him. And that happens, right? Like, there are not, like, lots of players have not good games. They bounce back. They're fine, right? We have to watch for that because he needs a bounce back. The drops were bad. Some of them are overblown. That goal line one, was a little bit behind him in tight coverage. Like, but you've got to kind of make that catch, man. If if you're going to be the top receiver in the game, if you're going to be the first wide receiver taken in the NFL draft, you come down with that football. I also thought, the sharpness of his roots were off. And again, it didn't look like he was disinterested. It seemed like a physical limitation of him being able to like stop and start. And I'm wondering, like, we don't know what that injury was. We heard a lot about it. It sounded some serious, but then he's coming back and then he's playing and he's practicing. And so maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, we don't know what it was. It was a Liz Frank or was it an Achilles? Like, I don't, there's not a lot of information out there, but what it looks like on the field is that he's not the same player. Something's not there with the way that he was able to make his, the dynamic movements that helped him stand out, as a freshman. And I think that raises some questions, like to the point where if he didn't play, if his season wasn't going great 3-4 games in, and he says, I'm just going for the NFL draft, I think he could fall out of the top 5 wide receivers. I think he could fall out of round 1. That's a lot of money he's costing himself. I mean, we talked about it. Burton, right? Burton had a pretty good game, right? He's going to be building up his draft stock. Quentin Johnson was streaky, but that's Quentin Johnson. I don't think NFL teams are going to hold that against him if he's displaying the skills and growth that he needs to play. And he's out there, right? If Quentin Johnson is out there through rough quarterback play, a tough team situation, and he's still playing his heart out, and he's showing NFL teams what he can do, what he can bring to them, they'll take a chance on Quentin Johnson over Kayshon Boutee. And Jordan Addison, right? Like, Jordan Addison's playing now with USC. Like, he had a good game. There, a lot of other good games out there too. I could see Boutee falling out to be mid to late round 2, especially if there's a lot of question marks, and you're going to hear about it in the draft cycle. Does he have the heart? Does he have the discipline? Brian Kelly keeps talking about these off-field concerns. Not worried about Boutee on the field. I'm concerned about him off field. Like that. We saw Darius Geis fall in the draft because of something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really valid points there. It's going to be interesting. Like, if I'm Brian Kelly this week, I'm drawing up plays and getting him back. They need him to be a part of that offense. Like, if you completely take him out, LSU's it might already be a really tough year for them moving forward, but like, they need to kind of find a way to get him going early. What if the physical capabilities are there and there's not some type of limitation holding him back? But it's going to be really interesting because it's going to be one of those things where if he's not having a good year, does he choose to shut it down? Does he, what does his agent then put out once he says he's done? He's going to be signing. I keep going back though, like, Derek Stingley had 2 years of basically nothing and still went towards the top of the draft. The NFL evaluators do sometimes hold on to glimpses of like freshmen, but it comes down to what you're saying though. Like, you didn't hear
played
much.
Hard though. Stingley played all the way through, right?
And there wasn't character from what I know.
And he didn't look like he was half-assing it out there.
Yeah, it was just he wasn't as good as that freshman year, and then he didn't play 1 year due to whatever. I don't know if it was injury or to COVID, I forget. But like, they mostly just went on that first year, right? That was like what made him such an elite prospect, and then just like the traits. Boutee would be living on that year, but he had played 2 more. Well,
it wasn't that
part of it.
It wasn't that, like, when he was a breakout year, he was phenomenal, but it wasn't this, massive, Jaxon Smith-Njigba's sophomore year breakout, right? Like, we're not talking 1,600 yards as a freshman. We're not talking a Rondale Moore kind of thing.
And Dane Brugler last week said he doesn't think this wide receiver class is anywhere near what we've seen previous years. So again, and Dane's is connected to NFL people. Like, he says even Boutee and Smith-Njigba, he says, I'm not sure they're top 10 or top 15 guys.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions. So this could be one of those years. Now, again, wide receivers do tend to get pushed up. Teams need them and want them. But it's not inconceivable, especially if we have 4 or 5 quarterbacks go early. It's not inconceivable that this is more of one of those years where you have like 1 or 2, maybe
20
one in
to
the
40s.
top. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be you have a couple go late in that 20 to 32 range, and then a bunch in the early, round 2. So it's going to kind of be interesting. Boutee's going to be the one that, as long as he's playing, we're going to be kind of checking in on that the rest of the year. A couple other big names. Jordan Addison kicked off his campaign there with USC, 54 yards and 2 touchdowns. Zay Flowers, big game, 10 catches, 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like I said with Jurkovec, I watched that whole game. Zay Flowers looked more explosive. I said it on the wide receiver show. I didn't know what it was. 2 years ago, I thought he was an explosive vertical slot. Last year, I had my reservations when I watched the film that I thought maybe he was just more of like a more prototype slot guy, not a guy who could make big plays. And I kind of said, where were those big plays from the year before? He started showing some of that. Maybe it was whatever going on last year after the Jurkovec injury, the play calls, whatever. Flowers off to a good start. I know we said that we were going to keep a close eye on the Maryland situation. For first week, that went to Raheem Jarrett being the clear alpha there. 6 catches, 110 yards. Demas Jr. 3 catches, 23 yards. Any thoughts on any of those before we kind of round out the wide receiver position with 2 guys who, are really intriguing, exciting players?
No, I think it's great to keep an eye on that. You mentioned all the highlights and the quick hits of what's important. I think we really should get into talking about Ainias Smith and Cowing here. Cowing in his debut had 8 for 152 and 3. And so we missed him on, the wide receiver preview. He was one of those ones where you hit it at the very end, hey, look, these are another 5 to 6 names that, we have to pay attention to, that they're right there. And, with a debut like that, as he transferred over Arizona and just, I'll start with him because, Ainias Smith is your guy. And I have some thoughts on him, but I'd love to, let you go ahead and take first crack on him. But, as far as Jacob Cowing goes, he was heavily involved in the scheme there. Like, we're talking about, like Josh Downs level integration into the offense. And I think he's, again, his size, his stature. I mean, it just looked like watching Josh Downs tape, even to like the nitpicks where, he's jumping at the catch point the same way I mentioned in Downs's, film breakdown to start the year. But his ability his speed, his yak ability, his ability to eat open field space and make big plays, 100% from the slot. I mean, a lot of schemed releases. Like, we're not seeing him off prefs. We're not seeing him off man. We're not seeing him challenge. Like, there's going to be a lot of question marks in his prospect profile. And I don't think we're going to see any of that change. But I do think with the level of involvement that he's going on this year, like, you have to immediately pay attention to this, because he's on that level of, alert that you would have for a Josh Downs, that you'd even have for a Jordan Addison level. Like, this guy is going to be extremely productive this year. And I see him hitting the draft after a year like that. And potentially, if you have to, I wouldn't mind as a team, if I'm looking for that profile of player, I wouldn't mind spending a later pick on a guy like Jacob Cowing than I would an early pick on a guy like Jordan Addison.
Yeah, and Cowing is a guy that explosive skills in terms of what he put up last year at UTEP. I mean, listen, the 2 big question marks with Cowing is that we need to see that level of athleticism and production translate against better competition, not the oppositions that UTEP face, and can 166-pound frame, which is what his listed weight is. He needs to add to that frame for sure by the time the combine and Senior Bowl and stuff rolls around. But if he can add a little bit to that, then yeah, his skill set is not all that different than a Jordan Addison and a Josh Downs. So if he shows he can translate with the transition to better competition from UTEP to Arizona, and he can add to that frame a little bit and keep the explosiveness, which I think he can do. But this is a guy who plays even bigger than that. Like, if people went back and haven't been familiar, you watch his film, there's highlights all over UTEP games that, him leaping, making plays at the catch point. So really intriguing player. Glad you brought him up, because he's going to be a guy that I think we're going to be checking in on a lot. And he's going to be a guy you're going to see draft stock really continue to soar because teams are looking for offensive weapons. So even if he's not the prototype and you have to only in the slot as an offensive weapon, I mean, Wendell Robinson just went pick 45, right? We have guys who don't fit, certain benchmarks in terms of certain physical capabilities still going really high in the NFL draft now. It's different. So Cowan could be in line to be one of those guys that could do that. And then you mentioned him before, Ainias Smith, a guy who I think is going to be considered maybe the best mover in this class. So, we here at Saturday Sunday talk a lot about movement skills. I thought 2 years ago, Kadarius Toney had the best movement skills. I thought last year that was Wendell Robinson. I've been on record saying I really think Ainias Smith is that guy in this class. He's got some Kadarius Toney to his game. I think he's going to be on a trajectory right now wherever you see him in rankings, and it's not very high. I think I had him at 8 before the season started, and I didn't find one place when I did in my search of other people's rankings that even had him in the top 10 or top 15. Most places had him after that. But I like his game. 164 yards, 2 touchdowns. I think he's got route running skills. I think he's got playmaking skills. What I saw this week was basically anytime I watched film on him and dug in, I saw this really explosive playmaker. It was nice to see him kind of hit the ground running in week 1. So Jeff, any thoughts on Smith there to kind of close out our draft eligible talk before we hit on a couple Devy guys to round it out after the tight ends?
And when we did the lead into next year and you did your tier busters, right? And we had a tier 1 and a guy kind of at the end of tier 1 that you included that not a lot of other players had at the time was Jahan Dotson. And I think Ainias Smith is this year's Jahan Dotson. Like, he's going to be a round 1 pick. He's going to be going around all these other players, but no one's going to be lumping him in there. And he's a complete wide receiver. Like, he's going to be labeled as a gadget by some, but he is a complete wide receiver. Just his hands, his route running, his explosiveness, like, it's all there. He's going to have a great year too. And again, we had some questions, about how, Achane's game this last one, but like Ainias Smith was, he's the star right now of Texas A&M right there. So
yeah. And I think Texas A&M is going to be fun. I think they're really going to feed him this year, which we didn't really get a chance to see that yet. I think this might be where it all comes together and has that monster statistical year. And maybe that does get him on the radar a little bit more and higher up people's ranks. Let's transition this to the tight end. Not a lot to talk about. A couple things. Where is Arik Gilbert? I don't even know what's going on with that situation, which was really weird. So that's a to be determined, I guess. Keep a close eye on it.
I researched. I tried to find something. Couldn't find anything about it.
It's just like, so I don't know what to say about that right now. I've made my feelings well known that the NFL might love him and he could easily be tight end 1 in this class if everything checked out and he had a good year, but not how you want to kind of see it start. Michael Mayer is the more balanced and more consensus tight end 1 right now. He had a pretty ho-hum game against Ohio State, 5 catches, 32 yards. You'd like to see him be a little bit more involved there. And I wanted to bring up the Utah tight ends only because if you rewound this a year ago and listened to Saturday and Sunday, I was really intrigued by Brant Kuithe. I thought he could very much. We had seen guys like Kyle Granson go, I think it was round 3 of the NFL draft. Dalton Keene go round 3 of the NFL draft. Maybe Granson slipped to round 4. But that prototype of like that guy who's not really a tight end, Brant Kuithe, I think used to be a wide receiver, really good athlete. And then like last year, it kind of like shifted to be more like Kincaid was the tight end to be talking about there in that Utah tight end room. And then week 1, it shifted back. I know it's just 1 week, but Brant Kuithe, 9 catches, 105 yards, 1 touchdown. He's a really explosive player for the tight end position, a high-level athlete with, very productive receiving career in terms of his college career. So he's just a guy that I think the separation between Kincaid and Kuithe on people's boards needs to really narrow pretty quickly. Because I think Kuithe is a guy who offers that intriguing skill set as a guy you can move and make him your move tight end and do a lot of different things with him because he does have athleticism that's more receiver-like than tight end-like. So, Jeff, any quick thoughts on the tight end situation before we do a little rapid fire of in terms of our Devy Slant?
Just that, again, what we have to look for Mayer's film is, more big plays, more explosiveness, tackle breaking, however he's going to do it. It doesn't seem like it's going to be with elite athleticism. So, is he going to be able to be, a tackle breaker or, a more efficient zone beater, set up the yak, however he's going to do it. That's the type of thing that we're going to need to see from it, develop from him. Not necessarily to not be the tight end one, but, for him to really elevate himself into what would be a difference maker for fantasy versus just a really good, utility player, outlet, option, even just sort of, PPR first down engine for NFL teams.
Yeah, and I mentioned him when I said who he compares to. We got to figure out if we can get a read on what the NFL thinks. Do they look at him as more like TJ Hawkinson, or do they look at him as more like Pat Freiermuth, right? Because the range on those guys was like top 10 and then like mid-second round, right? Mm-hmm. Where does Mayer kind of fall? I think it's probably somewhere in the middle as more of like a 20 to 32 type guy. I don't think he's a top 10 or top 15 guy, and I don't think he's a second round guy. So I think it probably ends up meshing in between where those guys were taken in terms of their draft capital. And we'll see about Arik Gilbert and what happens with that. So let's take this to the Devy Slant, where we always kind of just hit on a couple names of intrigue. For me, the guy that stood out in terms of the whole weekend was Drake Maye, a quarterback from UNC. That UNC Appalachian State game was absolutely bonkers wild. He had 352 yards and 4 touchdowns, 76 yards rushing, and another touchdown there. To me, this is a guy, kind of like how we saw Caleb Williams' stock just soar last year. Once he got an opportunity, I think we're going to see that from Drake Maye. I think him and Caleb Williams are the two underclassmen quarterbacks that are not draft eligible that I think are going to be the guys on our radar. Next year when we're talking about draft eligible guys, I think Maye and Caleb Williams could be two of the more intriguing ones. Great start for Drake Maye. Caleb Williams transferring to USC, 248 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's going to have no issues with that transition, especially same offense that he's comfortable with. Jeff, any quick thoughts on Maye or Williams or anybody else you want to maybe bring up the quarterback spot?
Quick hit on Williams. Drafted him in a Devy league this offseason. So really excited to see this. I mean, he basically pitched a perfect game, 19 for 22, 70 yards rushing. Let's hope he is Kyler 2.0 for my Devy squad sake. But Drake Maye, there was a little bit of buzz going into the year for him, but nothing that, that really he exceeded all of the expectations that were set at the start. I think immediately everybody is recalibrating what they think of this guy and what they think he can be and what his potential will look like. And I mean, UNC is going to need to score a lot of points. And so we could just be seeing just lights out, just fireworks, from Drake Maye. He might have to. So that's one of those names where, now, got to start now. I might almost rather get on the Drake Maye rocket ship than the Anthony Richard rocket ship personally. But that's, I just thought I saw a lot out of Maye as a player that I think, and he's got the time and I think the ability to develop well as a quarterback. But that's just my kind of I think we're talking about guys on the trajectory there, Dogecoin to the moon, stocks up, round one, early picks.
Yeah, and I think listen, I know he's well regarded in Devy circles as well, but kind of like I was saying before about Anthony Richardson, Drake Maye is another one of those guys, right? Quarterbacks are one of those tricky things, right? Because if it's more of a traditional one quarterback league, listen, I like CJ Stroud and I like Bryce Young a lot, but are they really going to be in fantasy circles true X factors at the position? Because look at the guys who are at the top of the quarterback market right now in terms of fantasy in the NFL, right? CJ Stroud and Bryce Young aren't bringing a Josh Allen package to the game. They're not bringing a Patrick Mahomes package to the game. They're not bringing a running capability of Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray. So for them to hit really hit, they got to be as prolific as Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, right? To be in that top 5 to 7 mix. And maybe they can get there, but I'm not sure I see either of them on that level. So then you look for the guys who can have that X factor, that rushing ability that can be the next Kyler Murray with the passing or Lamar Jackson. And that's why guys like Richardson and Drake Maye really intrigue me. And I think getting them early is the way to kind of do it. Be aggressive and try to get them on your teams now. If we take this to the running back, because I really only have one I want to bring up, and that's Braelon Allen out of Wisconsin. 14 carries, 148 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I bring him up. It was a weaker opponent, so it's something gaudy about the stats, but I think he's going to be a guy that may close the gap. And I don't know how big it is, but I think he may close the gap in Devy ranks and Devy circles to another underclassman in terms of TreVeyon Henderson, who I love. I think that gap might close a little bit. And I think as this year goes on, once the new running back class once the current running back class starts to settle itself out a little bit, I could see Braelon Allen maybe jumping some. I'm misusing some names from this year's draft class, whether it's, Sean Tucker we mentioned, or, Tank Bigsby. I could see Braelon Allen, even though he's a year behind these guys, leaping some of those other guys that we really like in this draft class upcoming, and maybe closing the gap on TreVeyon Henderson. I think he's a really strong, big-time athlete, good rushing capabilities already. So I think he's another guy who's going to be regarded as one of the top underclassmen running backs in the country. I know he's already there, but I think you're going to start to see a little bit less separation maybe between him and Henderson. Jeff, any thoughts on Allen or any other running back you want to bring up from this past weekend, underclassmen?
Yeah. Braelon Allen. He's my boy. 90 of those yards were on like one play, but hey, I mean, he earned those, right? Patience. I mean, you saw the highlight. Patience, nothing was in front of him, work through it, and then just erupt through the line of scrimmage and just out through, into the third level before you even knew it. And he was gone. And that's the kind of, and he's big, right? Like, and he's young. He's really young right now. I think he's like a year younger than a bunch of other players his grade, something like that. So,
and he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list. Like, this
I
is
know.
not, like, so this is like the total package we're talking.
Yeah. I mean, like, no, I can't do the superlatives as far as like comps yet, but just, we're talking about a guy who could be extremely special. And, we probably won't see a lot of pass catching stuff. That's always going to be a part, like, you're just looking a year down the road.
I'll put a name. There's going to be some Jonathan Taylor comps. I think we're headed
there's the the Wisconsin. Yeah, totally. I mean, you're going to hear Derrick Henry comps too, just, he's really, really, really good. Really, really fun to watch. I don't think there's a big gap between him and Henderson right now. There's a long way to go, right? And that's why, in my eyes, there's not a big gap, is because there's a lot of projecting to do. There's a lot of development. There's a lot of path to go, right? Like, if you're going to call big gaps now, you're going to be wrong, because, so many things change, right? But good players, invest in good players. These are 2 really good players. Bottom line, just, I wouldn't be surprised if we're seeing a, 1A, 1B kind of situation, and who, which one is the 1A on their draft class. I don't know. Depends on what you want. Maybe you've got pass catching, more pass catching with TreVeyon and people feel safer, but 2 really good players. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong with either of them right now.
No, not at all. And if we kind of close out the Devy Slant for this week with a couple pass catchers and some big names here, I'll start with, we mentioned the tight ends before. Brock Bowers of Georgia, Dane Brugler last week said he's going to be regarded as maybe the best tight end prospect to ever come out, since he's been doing this. So that would put him like at the Kyle Pitts level, so I'm intrigued by that. But I mentioned him because he's probably going to have very ho-hum statistics, because that tight end room, if Gilbert plays and Darnell Washington is an intriguing name, and they don't throw a ton and they like to run and they're going to be up big, but so you're going to see games like that, 2 for 38, and it might be a very quiet statistical year at times for him, but don't lose focus on how special of a talent he is. And then in terms of some receivers, the Ohio State duo that kind of was forced to play a bigger role this past week with Smith-Njigba going down. Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm probably going to say the last name wrong, Emeka Egbuka. I'm not exactly sure I'm saying it right. 9 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown. I know I narrowed right away when I watched that game because of how good I thought Egbuka was. I narrowed the gap where I had Harrison and Knapp because, again, the Devy rankings for me aren't guys that I've done deep dives on, especially the underclassmen. So, like, it's a little bit more what I've seen and watching games live and projecting in terms of I think those guys, are very close in terms of who could be that next great Ohio State wide receiver. And I think what it showed me is I know that the Devy community, myself included at times, has continued to leave the light on for Julian Fleming to become this superstar. I'm just not sure he's going to rise when they have Smith-Njigba there, Harrison, Egbuka. Like, these guys are really – so he could definitely emerge to be a productive player.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure he's going to catapult to be what we once thought he was going to be.
He didn't in this game, right? It was they said he didn't in this game either, right? It was Harrison and Egbuka rising up.
Yeah. And, so I just think it's going to be one of those things that these guys got. Harrison's pretty high up in most circles, but I think Egbuka's got to move up. And then maybe the Devy community's got to just say, okay, we got to move Fleming down a little bit. And if he changes their mind, great, and shows us why he was that 5-star major, top level wide receiver recruit, sure, then we move him back up. But right now, it's been enough years into, his time there that he hasn't shown anything yet. Like, he's not even on people's watch list for like draft eligible prospects, and he's draft eligible. Like, so he's got to now, I think, earn that ranking a little bit. And I know I'm going to move him down in my Devy ranks when I do a little update. And it's okay if we see something this year. And it's not like three or four guys can't produce at Ohio State. They throw the ball enough that they can. But I think he's got to show me a little bit more, because I think Harrison and Egbuka, I got to learn how to say his last name. They're gonna rise up and continue to show that they're going to be the next wave of elite Ohio State wide receivers that we basically get to see every year. They have 2 or 3 high level guys. Any thoughts on any of the Bowers, the Ohio State duo, or anybody else from either position you want to bring up to round out the night?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be saying his name a lot, right? Just how we had to learn, Smith-Njigba and, a lot of other ones that we've butchered. I think Roshan, right? His brother reached out to us about his, his tape. Why not both, right? I like them both. It may not be a one or the other with Harrison or Egbuka, but why not both? It'll be a fun one to watch, being underclassmen, and I do selfishly hope Brock Bowers has a little bit of a quiet season, just so I have more opportunities to kind of scoop him up a little bit in some places. But it's Georgia. Georgia is not about the stats, right? You're about the traits. You get drafted off your traits. You're not necessarily going to have statistically gaudy seasons, especially as a pass catcher out of there. I mean, they're throwing the ball more. That's a storyline that I want to watch. But yeah, JT Barrett, he was looking good. But Stetson Bennett was looking pretty good. But and throwing the ball more. That's great. So maybe, but it's also Georgia. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. So that's, listen, week 1, I think, lived up to the hype of like being a fun weekend of games, a fun weekend of, prospects. I think there was a lot to talk about from this weekend. There were so many other names that we didn't even, get a chance to talk about. As somebody that roots for Florida State, I'm excited by their quarterback that they have there. That was a great game. Yeah, Travis. Really good. Yeah, that was a really fun game. They might finally have, solved the quarterback riddle there, and maybe that is what they need to kind of turn things back around there and start getting back on the men, because college football is more fun when the Seminoles are a big time program as well. And
I was trying to watch Boutee, and I kept going back to I was like, I'm not skipping through this Florida State, offensive possession. Travis was really good. That's good. There's good signs there.
Yeah, so for sure. So I think Mike Norvell, 3rd year, maybe, coming from Memphis, finally is going to turn around that Knowles program, and it would be great to kind of see them get back into the thick of things. Maybe not.
They've
It's going to
also,
take some more
we're
time.
off the rails here, but they've also got some good wide receiver. But they have a freshman defensive lineman who was just wreaking havoc in the backfield there too.
Oh yeah,
I have
and
to pick up
then
his name, number 5.
and then they also got a transfer from Albany of all places here in upstate New York that I don't know how he wasn't recruited, and he had like 2 sacks yesterday. The first extra point blocked was him. So they got some players there. So hopefully the Noles are turning things around there. But it was a great weekend of college football, fun for people like you and me, who love this stuff in terms of just the sport in general, the games in general, but then also from the evaluation standpoint to kind of kick off this next, journey to April of 2023. And there was a lot to digest from week 1. So on behalf of Jeff, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.